The brands on her palms had never been warm before. Maren noticed it first as the escort led her through the outer gates of the amber court. The great sandstone palace that rose from the desert floor like something that had decided centuries ago to become permanent. The burn scars sat in the center of each palm, 2 circles, the size of gold coins, pressed into her skin with a heated ring when she was 12 years old, and they had ached ever since with the particular memory of hot metal and her guardian's grip. They had ached. They had not done anything else. Now they pulsed. She pressed her fists against the sides of her plain grey candidate's gown and kept her eyes forward, where 11 other women moved in careful procession ahead of her toward the receiving hall's high doors. They were from every corner of the desert kingdom. Lords' daughters, a war leader's youngest, a healer whose rank had earned her placement here. Maren had no rank. The High Chancellor's list simply read, Maren, foundling, no family name. Presented by Lady Vessa of the Southern Holdings. She had been delivered here the way someone disposes of a thing they are tired of being responsible for. She understood this. She had understood it since the morning Vessa had appeared in her doorway and told her to pack her things, that there was a selection being organized, that Maren had been nominated, that it was an honor. The particular shape of Lady Vessa's smile that morning was the same shape it took when she was solving a problem and calling it generosity. The great hall swallowed them. It was immense in the way that only things built by someone with 4 centuries and unlimited stone can be immense. Columns of pale sandstone rising 40 feet to a ceiling carved with hunting cats and desert stars, the floor laid in amber tile that caught the light of 100 oil lamps and scattered it like agitated water. Along both walls, the court stood in formal dress and watched the candidates process through the center with expressions ranging from disinterest to open evaluation. The air smelled of lamp oil and dry heat, and something older underneath. Stone that had been warm for a very long time. Maren catalogued the exits before she catalogued anything else. 2 doors behind her, one on either side of the hall's entrance arch. A servant's passage at the back left, half hidden behind a column. 4 high windows too narrow to fit through. Not that she would need them. She was simply noting, the way she had learned to note such things in every room she entered in Lady Vessa's house. Because noting them first made everything else quieter. It was only after she had finished that she allowed herself to look at the throne. The Alpha King Aldric sat at the far end of the hall, on a chair of carved amber and black iron that looked less like a throne and more like something that had been used for actual purpose long enough to stop being decorative. He was not what she had expected. She had been told about him in pieces. Alpha King Aldric of the Amber Court, last of the ancient bloodline, 400 years of rule, and not 1 year of aging visible in his face. And the pieces had assembled, in her imagination, into something cold and remote and metallic. Instead, he was dark and weathered and present. His hair was close-cropped, silver-threaded through the dark. His shoulders were broad beneath a plain brown leather coat cut for function, not ceremony. No embroidery, no gilding, the kind of coat that had been worn through work and not yet replaced. His hands rested on the arms of the throne, large hands, scarred at the knuckles, the kind of hands that had been used and knew exactly what they were for. A thin old scar ran from the outer edge of his left jaw to beneath his left ear, pale against his weathered skin, so settled into his face that it had stopped looking like a wound and started looking like geography. His eyes were gold, not metaphorically. They were a true, deep, unsettling gold, the color of sun through aged amber. And they moved through the line of candidates with an expression that was not cruel, and was not warm, and was not particularly anything Maren could name. He looked like a man who had been waiting for something for a very long time and had learned, through repetition, not to show that he expected each attempt to fail. She was struck by him in the way that she was sometimes struck by things that were beautiful, in a difficult way. Not easy or soft, but true. The kind of beautiful that acknowledges what it has cost. The brands on her palms intensified. She pressed her fists tighter and looked away. The High Chancellor moved through the presentations in order, reciting each woman's name and lineage and region of origin, with the careful neutrality of someone who has been told to treat all candidates as equivalent, regardless of what he actually thinks. Maren listened. 17 years of living in houses where missing information got you hurt had made her a precise listener. She could track 6 conversations at once and catalogue the emotional subtext of each without appearing to pay attention to any. The other candidates were poised, practiced. They had prepared for this. Maren, foundling, no family name, presented by Lady Vessa of the Southern Holdings. The murmur that moved through the court was brief and did not require a translator. She kept her chin level and her hands at her sides and looked at the far end of the hall. At the throne, at the man, in the plain leather coat who had been presented to her as the reason she was here. She was striking enough that the court took note of her. Not loudly, but with the specific attention of rooms that have learned to register what is unexpected. Dark chestnut hair, braided and fixed at the nape of a long neck. Threads of copper running through it that caught the lamplight and glowed briefly when she turned her head. A face that was particular and precise. High, clear cheekbones, a mouth wide and serious and refusing to perform, brows that gathered inward when she was thinking and did not release until she had decided. Her skin was the warm olive of the desert at late dusk. She held herself with a deliberate, controlled stillness. Not poise. Poise is performed. This was the stillness of someone who had learned, over years, you're not to take up more space than was strictly required. It did not diminish her. If anything, it made her more visible, the way a quiet thing in a loud room commands more attention than the noise does. He was looking back. Their eyes met across 50 feet of amber-tiled floor and lasted 3 seconds. His expression did not change, but the brands on Maren's palms flared so hot that she had to breathe through her nose to keep from flinching. And she had survived Lady Vessa's household and a 12-year-old girl's understanding of a heated ring, and she knew what it meant to breathe through pain without showing it. She breathed. The Alpha King's gold eyes moved on. The candidates were escorted to the East Wing, given rooms, given schedules. 3 days, the palace attendant explained. The king would observe the candidates through meals and court functions and the various structured meetings he had designed. At the end of the 3rd day, he would choose his mate. The woman he would make his queen. The word he had not used, but that everyone in the room understood was the subtext of every sentence said aloud. Or he would find no one, and the selection would resolve into nothing. And what that meant for the Amber Court's future, the attendant did not elaborate on. Maren sat on the edge of her narrow bed and turned her palms upward. The brands were warm, a quiet, persistent warmth. The way desert stones hold heat long after sunset, giving back what they absorbed. She had spent 8 years suppressing whatever generated that warmth, pressing it down and down and down, and she had become very good at it. And now, in this palace she had never seen before, something was pushing back against 8 years of effort. She had been told, in the village where she was born and in every house she had lived in since, that what came through her hands was wrong. Monster was the word she had heard first, in a voice she could not quite remember. Her parents had died when she was 4, and memory before 4 is unreliable. And monster again in Lady Vessa's household, said precisely, flatly, the way someone names a thing to stop being afraid of it. They had pressed hot metal into her palms to end it. She had believed for 8 years that it had worked. She reached into her pack and found the bone comb. It was a small thing. 7 teeth, pale bone, old enough that the surface had gone smooth and yellow. It had been her mother's. As she had found it in Lady Vessa's sorting pile when she was 9, in among the things being discarded, and she had taken it without being asked and said nothing, and it had never been mentioned again. She arranged it on the windowsill in the way she always did, perpendicular to the edge, exactly 1 finger width from the corner. She did not know why she always arranged it that way. She only knew that in every house she had ever slept in, she placed it exactly like that, and it made the room slightly less foreign. She looked out at the desert. The palace basin caught the last of the sunlight and held it. The whole landscape going the color of hammered gold in the long dusk. Something in that color, the particular quality of it, warm and ancient and indifferent, sat against the warmth in her palms in a way that felt, for the first time in years, like recognition rather than alarm. She closed her fists, told herself it was irrelevant. She told herself this several times. It helped somewhat the way it always somewhat helped to tell yourself a thing you already suspected wasn't true. She slept and did not dream of fire for the first time in longer than she could remember. The first morning of the selection passed in the great hall over the communal breakfast table, with all 12 candidates arranged around Aldric as he read correspondence and asked the High Chancellor questions about border disputes that had nothing to do with any of them. 2 candidates attempted light conversation with him. He answered them politely and briefly and returned to his correspondence. Maren ate and listened and watched. She noticed the pause before he signed each document, a half-second hesitation, in his pen hand, barely visible, quickly completed. She had seen that pause in other people. She recognized it as the specific shape of pain being managed in real time and not mentioned. She also noticed that he was, underneath all of it, beautiful in the way of difficult things. The watching courtiers saw a king of great age and greater power. She saw someone who had learned to make himself very still so that people would stop checking whether he was all right. The afternoon was open court session. 11 candidates did not attend. Maren found a seat near the back pillar and listened for 3 hours as he worked through disputes and territorial questions and a trade renegotiation that the Chancellor had been struggling with for 6 months. And watched the way Aldric moved through it, unhurried, specific, asking questions until both parties had told their story 3 times each, then deciding in ways that were not obvious until they were inevitable. His hands rested on the table when he listened. He turned his signet ring, amber and iron, with his right thumb when he was thinking, without noticing he was doing it. The warmth in Maren's palms was consistent throughout, quieter at a distance, stronger when she forgot to suppress it. She suppressed it and paid attention. The second day, she found the library. It was a working room, not a decorative one. Floor-to-ceiling shelving in dark wood, parchment, rolls in labelled cases, maps in broad, flat drawers, the particular smell of materials handled constantly for a long time. She was browsing the section on desert geography when the other shelf caught her eye. A recessed alcove, set slightly apart from the rest of the collection, housing a single row of journals. She counted them without meaning to, 43. Each was in the same handwriting. She opened the first. Its date placed it 360 years ago, and opened the most recent, which was 6 months old. The handwriting was the same hand, unmistakably, but it had changed. The earliest entries were formal, precise, every letter placed with the self-conscious care of someone who had learned penmanship as a discipline. The most recent had a very slight tremble in the downstrokes. Not much. Barely visible. The kind of change that happened so gradually across decades that no single entry showed it. Only the comparison across all 43. She closed the journal and returned it exactly as she had found it. She sat very still in the library and understood that she had walked into this palace prepared for one kind of man, a powerful man doing an administrative task, and had found a different kind of man entirely. A man who was running out of something that 4 centuries of ruling the Amber Court had not replenished. A man keeping journals no one else knew to look for, whose handwriting had gone slightly unsteady across the span of a generation. She found the mountain thyme on the 3rd morning in the palace's inner courtyard. It was a walled garden, open to sky, furnished with desert roses and thornbush, and the pale flowering cactus of the region, and then, in a corner, a single clay pot of mountain thyme, a northern plant entirely. Cold climate, wet soil, or no business at all, surviving in a desert kingdom. Someone had built a small woven shade shelter above it and kept the soil dark with careful watering. She pressed a finger to one of the small grey-green leaves. It was alive, thriving even. She asked the courtyard gardener later whose it was. "The king's," he said. 30 years? Tended himself twice a week. She stood very still for a moment after the gardener moved on, thinking about a man who had brought a cold country plant to a hot country and kept it alive for 30 years without explaining to anyone why. Thinking about the second cup she had discovered yesterday in the cabinet of the narrow kitchen off his reading room, clean, waiting, the porcelain slightly lighter in shade than his own cup, as though it had spent enough years in the dark that the light had simply stopped affecting it. A cup kept ready, in hope or in habit, for someone who had not yet arrived. She was thinking about all of this when the palace steward found her and told her that Lady Vessa had arrived that morning and was requesting a meeting. Maren stood very still for a moment that had nothing to do with thinking. She did not go to the meeting. She went back to her room and sat on the bed and pressed her palms together and ran through what she knew. Vessa had arrived. Vessa had claimed family concern. Vessa had never, in 14 years of guardianship, expressed concern for Maren's well-being that was not, at its root, concern for Vessa's position relative to something Maren was adjacent to. Vessa was calculating. That Vessa was here because she had delivered a foundling girl to the Alpha King's selection, and the foundling had not been immediately dismissed. And that made Vessa's position as the woman who had provided her potentially very valuable. She was halfway down the East Wing corridor when Lady Vessa found her. Not the steward, not a message. Vessa herself in the corridor, stepping from a doorway she should not have had access to, and positioning herself so that Maren's path forward and back were both blocked with the same wall of iron-grey composure. "I would like a moment," Vessa said. Maren stopped. She pressed one hand briefly to the corridor wall. Cold stone, the specific cold of walls that do not catch the desert sun, and catalogued the situation the way she had catalogued every situation in this woman's household for 14 years. Vessa was between her and the east wing. A servant's alcove was 3 paces to the left, unoccupied. The corridor was otherwise empty. She did not step toward the alcove. She stood where she was. "I have nothing to say to you," Maren said. "No, but I have something to say to you." Vessa's copper eyes moved over her in the assessing way that Maren had once found unbearable and had long since made herself simply observe. "I want you to understand that I have not come here to destroy your chance. I have come to ensure the court understands what they are bringing inside these walls, for their sake as much as yours." "You came," Maren said. Because I am adjacent to power and you have always been very good at positioning yourself near it. Something in Vessa's expression shifted. Yes, she said. That is also true. I am not going to insult you by pretending otherwise. She paused. The intelligence in her copper eyes was, as always, entirely real. Vessa had never been a fool, which had always made her considerably more dangerous than a fool would have been. But it is not the only thing that is true. Maren looked at her, at the careful, composed face, at the way Vessa's hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles slightly white. The small betrayal of someone holding themselves together with more effort than usual. Move, Maren said. Please. Vessa moved. Maren walked past her and did not look back, and kept her breathing even, and her hands at her sides, and did not press her palms against the wall again until she was around the corner, out of sight, and even then she pressed them against the cold stone, not for fear, but for the warmth of them. The warmth that was there, steady, that no 14 years, and no heated ring, and no calculating woman in a corridor had managed to put out. She went back to her room, and she arranged the bone comb on the sill, and she let out a breath that had been held for longer than the corridor. Maren arranged the bone comb on her windowsill, and told herself to be practical. She was still arranging her thoughts when the quiet knock came at her door. She opened it. Alpha King Aldric was standing in the corridor. He looked, very briefly, as though he had not expected to find her there. Which was... She catalogued this rapidly, either honesty or performance, and she was not yet certain which. I was told this room was unoccupied at this hour, he said. His voice was deep in the specific way of stone, resonant without effort, present without announcement, quieter than she had expected across 50 feet of amber tile. As though volume was something he rationed. I'm sorry, she said. Should I? No. His expression settled. I can see the courtyard from here anyway. He glanced past her to the window, where the inner garden was visible in the evening light. The clay pot of time just visible in its corner. That's enough. She looked at the time, then back at him. That's yours, she said. It was not a question. Yes. The gardener said you've kept it 30 years. It was brought from the Northern Territories, the mountains above the Valdris River. A pause she could not interpret. I lived there for a time, about 60 years ago. I was fond of the smell of it. She thought about 60 years ago, the way he said it. The way someone says, last winter. She thought about a man who carried a plant across 1,000 miles and kept it watered in a climate that wanted it dead for 3 decades because he had been fond of the smell of it in a place he no longer lived. It seems to be managing, she said. It complains, but it survives. Something moved briefly in his expression, too small and too careful to be called a smile, the way most things do, brought to the wrong climate. She did not know what to say to that. She turned from the window and found that he had not moved, and that he was still watching her with that unrevealing attention she had first noticed across 50 feet of amber, tiled floor. You attended the court session yesterday, he said. Yes. None of the others came. No. He waited. She understood the structure of his question, the space he was holding open for her to choose whether to fill it. She chose. I wanted to understand what kind of man I might be. She paused. What kind of man you are. And? She looked at him steadily. I think you're in pain, she said, and I think you've been very careful not to show it. And I think it's been long enough that you've stopped expecting anyone to notice. The silence that followed had the specific density of a room where something has just been dropped. I should go, she said. I have been searching, Aldric said, very quietly, for the bond, what my people call the pull, for 4 centuries. I had begun to wonder, toward the end, if I'd simply been born without the capacity for it, that there was no one. He was looking at the window, at the time in the courtyard, at something past both of them. I did not expect to feel it in my own receiving hall from a woman in a grey gown who was pressing her fists against her sides to keep herself from flinching. The warmth in Maren's palms was no longer quiet. She looked down at her hands. Then she made a decision. She held her hands up between them, palms toward him, and spread her fingers. He looked. He looked at the brands, the two circular scars, one in each palm, and his expression changed in the slow, layered way that stone changes color when it has been in water long enough. "Who did this to you?" he said. "Someone who is afraid of what I am," she said. It was the truest sentence she had spoken in 8 years. Saying it aloud felt like setting down something she had carried so long she'd forgotten she was carrying it. He was very still. He reached out. She tracked the movement and did not flinch, and was aware that not flinching was a choice and not a reflex. And he took her hands, one in each of his. He turned them palms upward and studied the brands the way he had studied the territorial dispute the previous afternoon. Carefully, without rushing toward conclusion. The warmth in her palms did not stop. It spread. Up her wrists, her forearms, a slow rising tide of heat. And she became aware, with a specific and frightened clarity, that the edge of the skin at her wrists was beginning to glow, barely visible. A faint gold, like lamplight seen through very thin cloth. She pulled her hands back. "That," she said carefully, "is what I have been trying not to show you." He was still looking at where her hands had been. "I will explain," she said. "But I need a little time to think about how." "All right," he said. He said it the way someone agrees to a thing they have been waiting a very long time to hear. "All right." She went back to her bed and sat and pressed her palms to her knees and breathed through her nose and tried to be rational. He had held her hands. He had not let go. When they started to warm, he had not looked afraid. She could not locate the threat in that. No, she catalogued it from every angle, the way she catalogued exits, and found nothing dangerous in it, which was somehow more disorienting than danger would have been. The next morning, the chamberlain came. There was, he said, in the careful language of men carrying bad news through good manners, a matter of formal inquiry. A concerned family representative had brought certain information to the Selection Review Council. Certain questions had been raised. The council would require the candidate Maren to attend a formal review session in the Chamber of Deliberation that afternoon. It was, he assured her, a standard procedure. The warmth in her palms went very still. Standard procedure, she thought. Yes. The Chamber of Deliberation was built for discomfort in the specific way of rooms designed to make people aware of being observed. Tall stone walls, high windows, no soft furnishings, a long table at which the 7-member council sat in formal robes. The room was arranged so that the person under review stood on a small raised dais at the center, 4 clear feet of elevation, visible from all angles, no wall to stand against. Maren stood on the dais with her hands at her sides and looked at the council, and then, at the far end of the table, at Lady Vessa. Vessa had arrived at this review, the way she arrived everywhere she had ever wanted to be, completely, appropriately, with all the right paperwork. She sat not as a witness. That would have been irregular. But as a concerned family representative with formal advisory status, acquired, apparently, between her arrival yesterday afternoon and this meeting. She sat with her iron-grey hair wound severely above the face that had been striking in youth and had become commanding with age, copper-coloured eyes watchful and entirely composed, dressed in the dark, formal cloth of the southern holdings. She did not look at Maren with malice. She never had. She looked at Maren the way someone looks at a problem they have spent years solving incompletely. The first councillor, cleared his throat. The council is convened to review a concern regarding candidate Maren. No family name. The concern formally submitted that the candidate possesses an unregistered supernatural ability of unknown classification, that this ability is historically associated with instability, that the candidate's guardian withheld this information from the selection process, and that introducing such an ability into the royal bloodline without formal assessment represents a significant risk to the stability of the court. A silence. Is the candidate able to respond to these concerns? Maren said, yes. She looked at the first councillor, not at Vessa. The candidate did not conceal anything, she said, because the selection process did not ask candidates to disclose unregistered supernatural abilities, because the selection process has no formal declaration requirement. Because I have no registered ability. I have never been formally assessed, named, or documented. What exists is old scar tissue. She held up her palms, and the word of a woman who was frightened of something she didn't understand. She has gold in her hands, Lady Vessa said. Her voice was level, precise. The voice of a woman who had rehearsed what she needed to say. I have seen it myself, when she was a child. She touched a dying sparrow in my garden, and it revived. She pressed her palms to a cracked well wall one winter, and the cracks sealed over. She is not simply unmarked, and she knows it. And it has been suppressed for years, and I do not know what happens when suppressed abilities destabilize. And I do not believe the Alpha Court should be taking that risk without understanding what they have invited inside these walls. The room was very quiet. Maren looked at Lady Vessa. She looked at her carefully, the way she had looked at things all her life, cataloguing, assessing, finding the threat in them, and in Lady Vessa's copper eyes, alongside everything she expected. The calculation, the self-interest, the careful management of advantage. She found something she had not expected and had never looked for. Grief. Old grief, long carried. She thought of a sparrow revived in a garden. She thought of the brands on her palms. She thought of Vessa's second marriage, and the years before it that Maren knew nothing about. She thought, surprising herself, that grief and cruelty were not mutually exclusive. That a person could be both afraid and wrong about what the fear required. She set that aside for later. She looked down at her palms. She had been suppressing this for 8 years. She had been suppressing it because she had been told it was dangerous, and wrong, and monstrous. And because a 12-year-old girl will believe most things an adult says loudly enough and with enough conviction. She had been suppressing it in this palace for 3 days, while it pushed back, patient and steady, against 8 years of effort. She was done suppressing it. She opened her hands, not unbuttoning a collar, not untying a wrap. She released the internal thing, the constant, active, exhausting suppression. The way you release a breath you've been holding so long you've forgotten breathing was supposed to be something other than effortful. The light came quietly. It rose from her palms like warmth made visible. A deep, true gold, warm as lamplight and morning, the color of the desert basin at dusk. It moved in slow waves up her wrists and forearms, and into the air around her. Not fire, not lightning, not the sharp and violent thing the word unregistered supernatural ability had implied. It was simply warmth, made visible. The warmth that stones hold and give back. The warmth of things that have been waiting to be useful. The council chamber was absolutely still. "This is what I am," she said. Her voice was very steady. It was the calmest she had been in years. The calm on the other side of the thing you've been dreading, when the dread is finally done. I don't know the formal name of it. I know it is old. I know it does not hurt people. and I know that I am finished pretending otherwise. From the door of the chamber, from a position she had not registered as occupied until this moment, a voice said, "She is the gold-handed, the lineage ability of the Eastern ancestral houses, dormant in the direct line for 3 generations." Alpha King Aldric walked into the chamber. He did not knock. He walked through the open door, with the particular quality of someone who has been standing in a corridor, being very calm about what they were about to do, and he crossed the floor and came to stand beside Maren on the dais. Not in front of her, beside her. "The ability is documented," he said, addressing the council in a voice without heat, and therefore far more alarming than anger would have been. "It manifests as ancestral spirit energy through the hands, a healer's gift of the old bloodlines, traceable in palace records through the Eastern territorial houses. It has not produced a carrier in this kingdom in 70 years. He looked at the first councillor. "The candidate is welcome to be formally assessed and documented by the court scholars at her convenience. For that is a bureaucratic process, and not a condition of the selection." He looked briefly at each council member in turn. "She is not a defect. She is the reason I have not given up." No one spoke. He looked last at Lady Vessa. Vessa had not moved since the light had come. She was looking at Maren's hands, the gold fading slowly now, settling back. And her composed, commanding face had lost its composure in the specific way of someone remembering something they have worked very hard not to remember. "I had a daughter," she said. She said it quietly, not to the room. "Before the Southern holdings, before the second marriage. A daughter who showed the same gift when she was small. She was 8 years old and she was frightened, and it came before she could understand what it was. And it came as fire. And she burned herself and half the house and—" She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on the table surface. "I thought, if I made it hurt, it would stay locked. I thought pain was the only thing that worked. I thought I was protecting you. You wanted me to be invisible," Maren said. "I wanted you to survive." Vessa looked at her hands. Not her own hands, Maren's. "I was not wrong about the danger. I was wrong about everything else." She paused. "She is nothing like what I feared. She never was." The gold had settled entirely now. The room was ordinary stone and lamplight again. Aldric said to the council, "The review is concluded." And to Vessa, without unkindness, "You will leave the palace grounds by this evening. You are not barred from returning. In 6 months, with advance notice. Sorry if Maren is willing to receive you." He did not look at Maren when he said it. He did not need to. The decision was hers, and they both knew it. Lady Vessa rose. She walked out of the chamber without looking at the council. At the door she stopped briefly and looked at Maren once. A look that was smaller and more honest than any Maren had ever received from her. And then she was gone. The council members departed in the efficient way of people who are glad of a reason to leave. The door closed. The chamber was empty, except for the 2 of them. "You knew," she said, "when you held my hands in the corridor. You already knew what you were feeling." "I suspected," he said. "The pull. What you feel in your palms near me, I have felt it once before, in someone else's presence, from across a courtyard. When I was very young by my reckoning. I recognized the shape of it. He was quiet for a moment. I wanted you to tell me. I was not going to force it. You let me decide when. Yes." She thought about the 3rd cup in his cupboard. The mountain time. The 43 journals. "That," she said, "is the most honest dishonesty anyone has ever shown me. And I don't know whether to be grateful or furious, so I am both." Something crossed his face that was, unmistakably, a smile. Small, careful, belonging to a man who had misplaced the habit. "That is entirely fair," he said. They stood in the empty council chamber, with the last of the afternoon light coming through the high windows, and she thought about what she had just done, what she had chosen to do, in front of 7 council members and the woman who had spent 14 years trying to keep her invisible. And she felt underneath the exhaustion of it something she didn't have an immediate word for. Not relief, something quieter and more durable. She thought, I was not invisible today. She thought I chose that. He was fading. She saw it plainly in the council chamber, now that she was looking for it. The lean against the table's edge, very slight, when the adrenaline of his entrance had settled. The particular careful way he moved, economic and deliberate, in the way of someone managing pain over a long distance rather than a short one. She had seen that quality of movement in the court session. She understood it better now. The bond, she said. It stabilizes you. Without it, you decline. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, the court physicians believe I have until the end of the dry season, perhaps a little past. She thought of 43 journals, of the penmanship going slowly, subtly, unsteady across the decades, of a chess game in his study that she had passed the previous evening, pieces arranged mid-game, the opposing side unmoved, dust on the black queen's crown. She thought of a second cup kept clean in the dark. She walked to the window. The courtyard was visible from here. The walled garden, the desert roses, the small clay pot of mountain thyme still standing in its shade shelter in the far corner. Tell me something true, she said. Not the administrative truth, not the medical truth, something you would not say to the council. He was quiet long enough that she thought he had decided not to answer. Then he said, I thought, as toward the end, that I had been wrong about all of it. That the bond was a story the ancient bloodlines told to make loneliness feel meaningful. That I had wasted 4 centuries searching for something that had simply never existed. He turned his signet ring with his thumb. Once. Twice. And then I walked into my own receiving hall and felt it. Immediate and specific and entirely without warning. And I understood that it had existed all along, and that I had simply arrived late. She did not turn around. I don't want to be chosen because you need me, she said. I need you to know that. I don't want to be a solution. You're not, he said. You are the reason I have not given up. Those are different things. The warmth in her palms was not suppressed. She had let it go in the council chamber, and she did not have the energy to resume the 8-year project of holding it back. It was present, quiet, waiting. The way the mountain thyme was present and waiting, in its wrong climate, tended, because someone had decided it was worth the effort of keeping alive. She thought about what she had carried for 8 years. The suppression, the invisibility, the careful minimizing of herself in every room she entered so that no one would have to be afraid of what she was. She thought about a woman who had pressed rings of hot metal into her palms at 12 years old, out of her own terror, and called it protection, and had not been entirely wrong about either the terror or the impulse, even if she had been entirely wrong about everything else. She thought about the sparrow in the garden, the cracks in the well wall that had sealed. She turned around. Aldric was watching her with the stillness of a man who has learned not to want things too visibly. His hands were at his sides. The signet ring had gone still. She crossed the room to him. She took his hands, one in each of hers, palms upward, the mirror of what he had done for her in the corridor 2 nights ago. And she held them open between them. She let the gold come. It did not come the way it had come in the council chamber, in the sudden shock of years of suppression releasing at once. It came the way a tide comes, gradual, inevitable, the slow rising of something that has been on its way for a long time. It spread from her palms into his hands, his wrists, and she watched his face, the exhaustion in the skin around his eyes, felt the specific weight 400 years had placed in the gold of them, and watched the pen hand tremor stop. His eyes brightened. The gold of them, the true deep gold, settled and cleared, and became present in a way they had not quite been since she had first looked into them across the receiving hall. He said her name. He said it the way someone tests a key they have been carrying without certainty, carefully, with full attention, and finds it fits. "I choose this," she said, "not because I have no other option, not because you need me, because I want to, because you kept mountain time alive for 30 years in the wrong climate, and you kept a cup clean in the dark for 400 years in case someone arrived to use it, and I have never in my life met anyone who was so quietly, stubbornly specific in their hope. She stopped herself. "I choose this," she said again, more simply. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression had no name she had a word for. Too careful to be joy, too present to be relief. Something earned, and therefore more. "I am not capable of small things," he said. "I want you to know that before this becomes final." "I know," she said. "I read the journals." Something in his face shifted, not quite a laugh, the recognition of one. "Then you understand," he said, "what you are choosing." "Yes," she said. She looked at her palms in his hands, the gold of them warm and steady and quiet. "I understand." It settled around them both like the last of a long sunset. Warm, present, final in the way of things that have been decided rather than forced. 3 days later, when the court had adjusted itself to its new reality and Aldric had moved through the formal announcements with the unhurried efficiency he brought to all things, Maren went back to the inner courtyard alone. She crouched in front of the clay pot of mountain thyme and pressed her fingers to its leaves. The plant leaned toward her slightly, the way plants lean toward warmth. She sat down on the stone bench beside it and turned her palms upward and looked at them in the late day light. The brands were gone, not healed over, gone entirely, as though burned away from inside, the skin below smooth and uninterrupted, and her own. She ran her thumb across her left palm and found nothing but warm skin. She pressed her hand to her chest for a moment, not out of uncertainty, out of recognition. The desert sky above the courtyard walls was going gold in the dusk, the way it went every evening. She was sitting there watching the light when Aldric came with the watering can. He did not appear surprised to find her there. He set the can down and sat beside her on the bench, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him. And he watered the thyme carefully, the way someone tends something they have been keeping alive for a long time and have not stopped believing in. After a while he said, "You'll want your own things here, not just the comb." She looked at him. Something warm and private moved in her chest. "The comb is enough to start." "All right. Eventually," she said. "Yes. But the comb is enough for now." He nodded. The thyme was watered. He set the can down and sat with her a while longer in the courtyard, while the desert went through its 7 stages of gold. Later, they went inside to his reading room. He made tea, dessert mint, and quietly mountain thyme steeped together in water that was hotter than it strictly needed to be. And he poured 2 cups and set them both on the table side by side with the unceremonious ease of a man doing something he had been waiting to do for 400 years without making a performance of it. She picked up her cup and held it in both hands. The clay was warm. She let the warmth come back, through her palms, gentle and certain, the way it always would from now on. Not suppressed, not frightened, not burning, simply hers. The second cup had been used before. She could feel it in the weight of the clay, in the particular smoothness of something handled many times, over many years, the porcelain worn to a specific softness. She had thought, when she first found it in that cabinet, that it was a cup kept ready for a guest who had never come. Clean. Waiting. The pale, careful hopefulness of it. She had been half right. It was a cup kept ready for someone who had been on their way for a very long time. She drank the tea. It tasted of the desert and the mountains and old patience and new warmth, and the two of them sat in the lamplight of the reading room and let the silence be the specific kind that is not empty. Outside, the courtyard was dark. The thyme was watered. The desert was quiet. The second cup was in use at last.